Afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Busse, and I'm the Director of the Health and Care Research Wales faculty. And I've got the pleasure of welcoming you all to a new kind of style of development that we're trying in the faculty, really trying to sort of shorter kind of soundbite type style, just because we're recognizing that people have so little time, and having full days out to come to faculty events is really quite tricky for people. So today we have our first kind of these series. So this is the Principles of Research Funding Practice, and it's a funder perspective. So we've got Michael Bowdery here, who's Head of Programs at Research and Development Division, Welsh Government. But also, really importantly, Michael is the chair of the EVIA program. I'm sure he's going to tell you more about that. But I think this is something that brings a really unique kind of contribution to the knowledge that we have in Wales. So I'm sure you'll look forward to hearing a bit about that. Michael's going to be then leading the rest of the session along with Professor Jane Noyes, Jennie Hejdenberg, and Marc Boggett. You can see the group of people who are going to be presenting today. And it's really great to see so many of you here. So future sessions, as I said, this is more of a different way of trying development. So on the 11th of December, we've got What Do Funding Panels See? That's an interactive workshop being led by two of our researcher development advisors. In January, we've got a research resolutions session, and that's led by Martin, Claire, and Julia as well. So Julia's our other researcher development advisor. And then in February, we've got a coaching conversations masterclass. So that's really thinking about how you can use a coaching approach with your team members as you develop your research. Okay, so next slide, please. And then we've also got a whole series of webinars coming up. We're releasing, so the webinars that are the next 5 webinars are here in front of you, but you can see them. They listed on the faculty website, and then we will be releasing the next lot of webinars sort of in the first quarter, so that you can then see the webinars that are planned for the second half of next year. And then we will be giving you feedback, asking for your feedback. So we will be putting a feedback link into the website. And we've also like to tell those of you that are faculty members about the faculty LinkedIn group. This group has been set up to really facilitate communication between all of the faculty members. It's a safe space. It's really to help you exchange knowledge and really think about opportunities to develop your careers as researchers. So we're going to be putting the link in the chat shortly. So thank you very much for joining us. I think it's going to be a fascinating afternoon, and I'm going to hand over to Michael now.
Thanks very much, Monica. I'm slightly distracted by that forthcoming program of events you've just put up, which looks amazing. I have to get some of those in my diary. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. So the title for the session is The Principles of Research Funding Practice at a Funder's Perspective. We can go to the next slide, please, Sarah. So as I understand the brief, it's not so much to demystify funding board practice, though there will I'm sure be a bit of that, but more to give you some insight into the way that we operate as a research funder, the kind of principles that drive us, and why we do what we do, which we appreciate from a researcher's perspective sometimes might seem obscure or even a bit bizarre, but hopefully we can bring some clarity to some of those kind of issues you might have as we progress through. Next slide, please. So Monica's already put names up. I won't dwell on this, but just to give you an idea of how the session is going to shape up, I'll keep my contribution quite general and give you some context and some sense of the commitment that we have as a funder to try and do what we do well. Jennie is going to speak more about our grant scheme as she leads the administration and management of that, and hopefully you'll see some of those principles in action and embedded in the practices that Jennie talks about. Jane has very kindly agreed to come along. We only have her for a short time because she's taking a break from chairing an MRC panel, but she's our funding board chair and has agreed to come and provide a chair's perspective on working with funders and scheme managers to ensure quality, and that some of those principles are really seen through. And then Marc is going to speak about the post-award bit of the process, some of the principles involved in managing your grants once you win them. And Marc is our grants team manager within Research and Development Division, Welsh Government. Next slide, please, Sarah. Right, so I'm Michael, as you know, as you've heard. In my substantive head of programs role, my responsibilities include oversight of our competitive funding schemes, both the project grants and the personal awards. I have oversight of our investment in research centres, that collection of investments we refer to as our research development infrastructure. I have responsibility for partnership working, so where we participate in cross-funder initiatives, for example, or partner up with other funders, such as our investment in the NIHR programs, or bespoke investments with organisations like Cancer Research UK or the Stroke Association. That's part of my role, to try and create those additional opportunities for researchers based in Wales. And I also manage the divisional budget, which is often really handy when we're looking at funding possibilities in relation to projects that are coming through the system. I've worked in the division now for just about 20 years, so have quite a significant track record of not just managing or running our own schemes. At times we've run them from the office, at times we've worked with contractors, as we do now with Jennie and her organisation, or the faculty team based in the Support and Delivery Centre. But I've also observed a lot of funding panels and boards, a lot of NIHR panels, but others as well, and been part of teams developing processes in some of those cross-funder initiatives that I mentioned. So I hope I can bring something valuable to today's session. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so just some context for you. Health and Care Research Wales is the external brand, if you like, and the implementation arm of Research and Development Division in what's now Health, Social Care and Early Years Group Welsh Government. So as such, we're a public or a government funder. Some things follow from this. First, we manage public money and are committed and indeed required to get the best value that we can from our budget. You will know, I'm sure, that our budget, though not insignificant, is limited. Our funding per capita, for example, is significantly lower than the funding that is available in England. So it's imperative that we use the budget well. And we are, of course, also bound by the financial rules and the post-award monitoring and audit requirements of our organisation, which often provides the rationale for some of the ways in which we operate, particularly across financial years. Next slide, please, Sarah. More specifically, as a funder, as a research funder, we strive to fund research that addresses unmet need, health, social care and public health need across our remit. We want to fund high quality research that's methodologically robust, and we want to fund research that's likely to be impactful. So a lot of our processes are designed to deliver against those criteria. We also strive to run processes that are fair, transparent, robust, informed by what we know of good practice or best practice in the field, and processes that we review and continuously look to improve between calls and across schemes. Next slide, Sarah. Okay, so I want to illustrate our commitment. Monica's predicted accurately by telling you a bit about the Ensuring Value in Research International Funders Forum and our role within it. This is a group that we joined at its inception back in 2016, and it's proved absolutely invaluable as a space for funders to come together to reflect on what they're doing and to learn from each other. Next slide, please. So I've repurposed and amended some slides I used for an AVEA presentation. As Monica said, I currently chair the AVEA steering group, which also includes a subsection of our members like NIHR from England, Forte from Sweden, ZonMV from the Netherlands, and the Health Research Board from Ireland. So the background to AVEA is a series of papers that Ian Chalmers and Paul Glaziou published in the Lancet, reporting and bemoaning the fact that a large proportion of health research spend is wasted for one reason or another, sometimes because research has been funded that is poor, sometimes because there's a huge amount of duplication in funders refunding projects that have already been delivered by someone else, sometimes because nothing is done with the results, so the research just kind of sits there or goes into professional journals and doesn't come out again. So that's the background, and the figure that they cited in terms of possible avoidable waste, 85%, was really quite staggering. Next slide, please, Sarah. So a group of funders decided to come together to see what we could do about this and how we could ensure that that the research that we fund is valuable, and we're not repeating some of the mistakes of the past in relation to waste. So AVEA are a group of health and social care funders now from around the world, and we come together to advance that practice, looking to increase the value of research. We believe that we have a responsibility to advance not just knowledge, but our own practices to ensure that they're as effective as they can be. And that's our objective there, to maximise the benefits to society from health-related research by advancing the practices of research and research funding. Next slide, please. And this, I don't expect you to see, to be able to read all of the names, but it just gives you a sense of the kind of reach of AVEA and the way the forum has developed over time. So that's an indication of organisations who've engaged by attending events or contributing to discussions and activities that have been running. You can see there's a strong kind of European cluster, but we reach out significantly into North America with funders in Canada and the States, and then as far over as Australia and New Zealand. Our most recently joined paid up member is an organization called NECA from South Korea. So again, that gives you some indication of the spread. And our funders are very mixed in terms of the size of their budgets, their status as government funders or research councils or third sector charitable funders. Next slide, please. So I hinted at this earlier, but we come together to share common challenges and the ways in which we do things. We look through a variety of means to learn from each other. We look for opportunities to collaborate, explore new opportunities together, or new ways of working. And AVEA's long had a desire to be a thought influencer in relation to research funding or research funding practice. So there are some activities there as well. Next slide, please. So to become a member of AVEA, a full member, we do have associate members for people who aren't funders but have a significant interest in the field or who represent other funders. Funders have to sign up to a consensus statement and a set of guiding principles and show commitment to implementing those. So on the screen here is the original consensus statement that was published in the Lancet in March 2018. So you can see there we recognise that as funders we'll maximise the value of the research we fund when we set justifiable priorities. when we fund projects that have robust research design, conduct, and analysis, where there is appropriate regulation and management that's proportionate to risk, where information on the research methods and findings is captured and used. And then the last point, really important, but somehow it got missed from the original iteration of the statement, that findings are appropriately and effectively disseminated to end users. And we recognise in the consensus statement the wide range of other organisations who are part of the research. That's okay. Go. Oh no, you've gone too far now. A part of the research funding landscape, as it were. Next slide, please. Okay, so this diagram kind of encapsulates the 10 guiding principles, which are in the white row across the bottom, and you can see the way that they're organized there. You know, first by relevance and express need, then a section on high quality research that minimizes bias, and then the open and transparentness of process and funding, and then the second row there breaks them down and groups them further. I won't read them all out. If we just leave the slide there for a sec, though, and I can share the slides later. They're also, by the way, listed in detail on the AVIA website with some supplementary text that shows not just why we think they're important, but some of the ways in which funders work to address and incorporate these principles. The ones that have been of particular interest are not unsurprisingly perhaps the principles 1 and 10. The principle that's about setting priorities in conjunction with those who are affected by a news research, and then the one about disseminating knowledge to end users, though there has been activity and interest obviously across all the 10 principles there. Okay, next slide please. And to give you more of an idea of the kind of things that we do, we hold roundtable events for members twice a year, one online and one face-to-face with hybrid options. They're 2-day events. The first day is always open to non-members and a wider audience, and we do have lots of invited speakers from influential organisations to feed into discussions as well. We've held a full international conference. We have a live interactive webinar series and what we call chatter sessions for people throughout our member organisations to engage in discussions that you know, across all appropriate levels. We have a number of live and active working groups and interest groups. We do publish. We've also had conference presentations and posters, and are often invited now to participate in other events like the European implementation event that ran in Holland. We were invited to a conference in Hong Kong. I didn't go to that myself, unfortunately. And recently, the Irish Health Research Forum invited us along to talk about our principles. We have created an AVIA dissemination and implementation definitions framework that kind of makes it clear that that dissemination is not enough, and breaks down activity at that end of the research process across 5 categories, including implementation and research on implementation. We've developed an audit tool for members to assess their practice against the guiding principles. I'll say a bit more about that a little later. We have an active Microsoft Teams community of over 120 members from 35 organizations. We regularly have 40 plus organizations attending the round tables as well, by the way. And a growing bank of testimonials showing the impact that AVIA membership and being part of activities within AVIA has had on the nature and quality of people's funding practices. Next slide, please. I won't read all these out, but there's just a sample there of the publications that have come from AVIA members working in various combinations across different principles from time to time. Yeah, you can peruse at your leisure later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so having responded to the challenge set down by Ian Chalmers and Paul Glazier, we were really pleased that they themselves recognised the efforts that as a group of funders we were taking to try and do something about waste and enhance, while simultaneously enhancing value. And the development of AVEER was described by them as perhaps the most notable and potentially influential development in addressing avoidable waste in research. And they saw AVEER as a group that would have a pivotal, or could have a pivotal role to play in fostering improvements. Next slide, please. Ian went further than that and actually nominated the forum for an Einstein Foundation Award for promoting quality in research. That's just a nice picture that carries a degree of gravitas, I think. But next slide, please, Sarah. So we were nominated by Ian with supporting letters from Paul Glazier, Meryl Ritzker-Heutinger, who does a lot of preclinical work and is looking to improve the environment there, and Gary Aslanyan, who works for the World Health Organization and directs an organization called Essence, which is a collaboration of funders from lower and middle income countries. And the nomination, we were then required to respond with documentation and assessed in relation to impact, innovation, validity, diversity, integrity, originality, and quality. We were shortlisted, but unfortunately didn't win an award. But it was a real boost to AVEER as a forum. And it has helped us move forward. It would have been nice if we'd won, because there was a financial element that would have put the forum on a really sound footing for 3 or 4 years, but sadly was not to be. But as I say, to be recognised and nominated, we took as something that was really positive in itself. Next slide, please. Okay, some more recent developments. Well, we've transitioned to a subscription-based membership model. For that reason I just mentioned, to put AVEER activities on a stable financial footing, rather than working on a kind of a best endeavours or an in-kind basis. And reflecting that development, we've produced and published a new strategic work plan called Expanding Our Ambition. There's a link to it there on the AVEER website, and if you go there, as I say, you can explore the guiding principles in more detail and other aspects of what we do. But the work plan has the following priority areas written into it. One is to review the consensus statement and guiding principles. And then we've got these other 4 areas where we felt more concerted cross-funder action was needed: equality, diversity and inclusion, sustainability, engagement with funders from lower and middle income countries, and research on research, using research itself to inform and improve research funding practice. And we do have a new host or secretariat. The original host was PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in the States. NIHR has been hosting and providing secretariat for the last 3 or 4 years, but it will now pass to the Dutch funders on MV, who are in the process of recruiting to the secretariat posts. And we'll be making a formal announcement on that next month, hopefully. Next slide, please. So I'll just say something about the review and evolution of the guiding principles, because you'll recognise much of what is there in, I hope, what follows today and the way that we work. So there was a recognition that there had been changes in the landscape since the original principles were agreed. There was also a desire to show the cyclical and interconnected nature of the principles in practice across the breadths of the various members' remits, and a growing feeling that the original principles were not just a bit too linear, but maybe came too strongly from what was specifically a kind of clinical trials background. So we've tried to address those issues in our recent recent review, and I can't share. The principles are still in draft form, though hopefully will be published shortly. I can't share the wording, but I can give you the headings that we're working with now. So we have principles in relation to meaningful involvement, dissemination, knowledge mobilization, and impact. So you can see there the wording goes further than the wording previously, which settled on dissemination. High quality research, which has to do with the robustness of assessment and quality of the work we fund. Equality, diversity and inclusion. Sustainable research practices and outcomes. Research management and regulation. Open science. Transparency, relating to funders' processes specifically, and evidence-informed learning, drawing on the research on research priority area. Next slide, please, Sarah. Just to say something to finish on this theme, on the impact of AVEER on health and care research Wales. A lot of the principles I know you're going to see embedded through some of the practices that Jennie, Jane and Marc are going to cover, though the relationship between AVEER and its members is symbiotic, and you know, AVEER influences the members. Similarly, the members influence the collective thinking of AVEER, and so it goes. I mentioned in an earlier slide that we developed a self-audit tool, and I will say something about that because it has been quite influential, certainly in my own thinking and the way that we've taken some of our practices forward. So the tool supports the critical self-assessment of funder practice against the 10 guiding principles. And we took it into research and development division. This predated the development of the faculty team, and ran it as a team exercise. We produced an internal action plan which contained 44 actions across all the principles, though there was, as often seems to be the case, particular interest in principles 1 around setting priorities with end users and those who benefit from research, and principle 10, which looks at dissemination and implementation. Next slide, please. And just to give you some highlights where either we did new things as a result of that exercise, or the exercise and the discussions within AVEER pushed activities that we were already doing in a certain direction, or just emboldened us, if you like, and gave us the confidence that we were moving in the right direction. So all of these things, which would probably be familiar to you in some shape or form, have followed from that. So we'd already started work on developing a process for research prioritization exercises, which we've really pushed through. People often now refer to it as a JLA light process, where we take a topic generated by Welsh Government colleagues that's of importance to Welsh Government, and then engage with practitioners and members of the public to find out what the uncertainties and issues that matter most to them are within that topic. Converting those issues eventually, after shortlisting, to research questions and getting them into funding schemes, whether those are our own or those of others. And we've now run 3 exercises, and we're midway through a 4th focused on women's health. So that directly came from our thinking around principle 1. We've introduced a new form of end of award reporting, the so-called 1-3-25 approach, for all project-based funding schemes, a 1-page summary that goes on our website, a 3-page executive summary that's used with policy colleagues and others to capture the main points of the research, and a 25-page scientific report that we will be publishing on our website. And that addresses Principle 9. We've enhanced our support for evidence synthesis activities. Certainly, and Jennie may touch on this, within the stage 1 of our application process in the new integrated funding scheme, but also more broadly in our investment in the Health and Care Research Wales Evidence Centre. We've continued the development of our funded projects tool on our website, partly in response to Principle 7, to make sure that all the work that we fund is open to view. both during the funding period and then in updated format once projects have delivered and can report on their findings. We've developed an open access policy and signed up to Europe PMC so that all of the research that we fund is out there and can be found, and so on. We've continued our investment in Research Fish, and Marc and others work hard to get projects registered and to help us track the outputs of the work that we fund. And within our team, we've enhanced our capacity for research prioritization work and knowledge mobilization activity with two dedicated posts to these work areas. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, I do this slide is I've written it in more conversational style, but I do hope I've given you a sense of what drives us and the principles behind what we do, and our commitment, and indeed the commitment of other funders, and including those who we work with closely as funding partners, to improve research funding and management practice. I did just want to flag, and I thought this might segue nicely into some of the themes Jennie will discuss. A nice MRC blog that I came across that's called 5 Things We Learned from Watching a Funding Board Meeting, because I think the reports of the researchers who attended attended meetings and drafted that blog do reflect some of the key messages that we're looking to put across today. Next slide, please. So these are the key points that they make in the blog, that there's a rigorous process behind funding decisions, that funding boards genuinely want to fund your application. They are funding boards, not funding boards. And most of the boards that I attend now, the chairs are very, very keen to strike that tone with the members, with board members from the very start of the time they join the board and at the start of all meetings. You get a lot of feedback through the process at different stages when you submit an application. This can help improve your application, so do pay attention to it. Each element of that process is there for a reason. They also report that observing a board meeting can help you write a better application, and most funders have observer policies that will allow you to apply to observe. And then write in plain English so that all members on the funding board can understand your application, not just the experts in your field. Funding boards by nature cover a wide range of areas of expertise, and you have to bear that in mind if you're wanting to make a strong case to the board as a whole. Though of course through peer review and particular members there may well be, well, there will always be through peer review expert view, but remember that you're writing for the board, not necessarily the main expert in your field. Next slide, please. Yep, so that's me. I've put my details on there if anybody wants to contact me subsequently for any discussion on any of these issues or anything else within my remit. And I do always encourage people to sign up to the Health and Care Research Wales Bulletin, where you get up-to-date information on all of our latest funding calls and opportunities. I'm just looking at the time, and we are slightly over where we thought we'd be. So maybe we'll hold questions off and I'll pass straight to Jennie. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you so much, Michael. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today. Thank you, Zara. So I'm Jennie Hejdenberg. I work for LGC, and that is a company that provides grant management services. So our customers include the Department of Health and Social Care, where we deliver part of the NIHR for them. And we also work with Health and Care Research Wales. So I work as the Assistant Director for the NIHR's Research for Patient Benefit funding programme. And I also lead the project grants team that administers the integrated funding scheme for Health and Care Research Wales. So I left academia after doing a PhD in psychology and a few postdocs to join the funding side. So in my presentation today, I'm going to set out some of those rigorous processes that Michael referred to that we undertake when running the research funding process. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit more about this, and I'm going to use the integrated funding scheme as a case study to describe all these activities that we undertake. If we can have the next slide, please. Okay, so just to set the scene then, that the integrated funding scheme is a new scheme. It launched in September last year, 2023, and it replaced the previous project-based funding opportunities that Health and Care Research Wales ran. So health research grants, RFPPB, and social care research grants. We have two researcher-led arms that each focus on translational and clinical research, and arm two, health and social care services and public health research. The scheme has had 3 funding opportunities open so far to the community, and we're planning for a commissioned arm, or doing a focused call in spring 2025. The annual budget for research projects is 2.7 million. And what that means in terms of projects, so that we hope that we would fund around 8 to 16 projects annually for that. If project cost is around sort of 150 to 350,000. Now, applications that are suitable for those NHR funding opportunities that are open to researchers based in Wales are not eligible. So why might a funder set an eligibility criteria like that? Well, Health and Care Research Wales buy into the NHR to allow researchers based in Wales access to some of those schemes. So setting this criteria means that the funding scheme really does cover research that wouldn't otherwise be covered by other available funding. And I suppose that also includes MRC. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the general remit of the integrated funding scheme, we want to see well-scoped applications for research that produce findings to inform later research funding applications, perhaps to the NIHR, but equally applications for projects that produce impactful findings in their own right are of course welcome. So we don't have an upper budget limit, other than that, you know, stating the overall budget available and how many applications that we expect to fund. So that, you know, around 150 to 350k. We do have a limit on time though, so 24 months maximum. Applications are required to produce a dissemination plan that clearly shows how the key messages will be communicated to the relevant audiences, and that includes policymakers, service providers, service users, carers, and researchers. But I suppose that depends on the research proposal itself. So perhaps for feasibility studies, you wouldn't necessarily need to think about implementation plan, but then it's more setting out what the next steps are for that research and what funding opportunity or what funding program that you're aiming for. Thank you. So in terms of eligibility, we are a funding scheme open to applicants based at an institution or organisation in Wales. And applicants need to have a PhD or have a track record of research experience. And of course, we expect support from the host organisation by the time you apply. And we do welcome applications from early stage career researchers, and they need to include a primary co-applicant just to demonstrate that support and mentorship that's needed when you start out on your research journey. Next slide, please. Great. So that covered some of the sort of basics of a research funding scheme, with a funder kind of really setting out what they want to fund with a funding scheme and thinking about who the scheme is for. And once you know what your scheme is for, the next step is then to set out the assessment process. So we can't fund every applications. You know, there isn't enough budget, but we also, of course, want to fund, as Michael's already mentioned, high quality research with the potential for impact. So how do we go about choosing what to fund? So there are some choices here. In general, a 2-stage assessment process is considered superior to a 1-stage. So my colleague Ben Morgan has written a paper on the RFPB programme moving from a 1-stage to a 2-stage process. And in that paper, they concluded that a 2-stage process was less burdensome and more efficient for all those involved with the process, and was cost effective. It requires less peer reviewers, and those that are rejected are of course informed earlier at stage 1. So most funders do use peer review to help make decisions about what to fund, although there are experiments and other examples out there. So for example, the Volkswagen Foundation and funder in New Zealand has used lottery. And I suppose that's particularly helpful if you have a limited budget and a lot of projects that are fundable, and you can then use a lottery to choose which one of those you're going to fund, and also can sometimes allow for kind of more risky type of research to be funded as well, to give people a chance to do that. I think the Volkswagen Foundation has put a paper out on that. But the most conventional way is using peer review. So peer review involves funding committees, but it can also involve going out for external peer review. So that's involving often sort of topic specific expertise in that area. It's recognized by our community, by the funders, that this is becoming, it is becoming more difficult to obtain external peer reviewers. There's a feeling that the research community has received so many requests for review from journals and from funders, and it's becoming sort of more difficult to obtain these. So I suppose from a funder perspective, it's important to point out the benefits of undertaking peer review. I know some experiments are going on in this area as well. And also kind of thinking about the value of the funding application. So lower value applications might require less rigorous a review than something that's come in for 3 million, perhaps a program grant award. So actually, in that vein, the RSPB program, we no longer undertake external peer review for research where the applicants are requesting less than 300,000, and we use the expertise on the funding committee, unless the funding committee has requested that, if it's an odd area where they feel they don't have expertise in. So public review is also a really important consideration, and the NIHR and Health and Care Research Wales are very committed to the involvement of public and patients, both in the undertaking of research, but also in the assessment process. So we involve public reviewers, and I suppose if you're going out for an external public review, you'd ideally have someone with lived experience of the condition under investigation. So in the integrated funding scheme, we have 4 committees. So we have 2 panels that help us do stage 1 assessments, and 2 boards that undertake the stage 2 assessments. So 1 for each arm there. But the membership do have some overlap there. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, we can go on to the next one, because I think I've covered most of this. Brilliant. Okay. Yes, there we go. So what does the application process look like then for a 2-stage process? So here is an outline of our current call that we're undertaking, call 3. So the call closed in October and has undergone a scrutiny process. And so we're now preparing for stage 1 panel assessment. So after that, applicants have been invited to submit to stage 2 applications. We'll be asked to submit those by March. And after that, we'll undertake external peer review of those applications. We also give applicants an opportunity to respond to those reviews ahead of the board meeting, just to help improve quality of the application ahead of that board assessment. Board assessment will be undertaken in June, and then outcome and feedback is in July. And projects are then expected to start on the 1st of October. Okay, next slide, please. So what considerations might we have when putting together a funding committee? So in a generalist committee, like the integrated funding scheme or in RFPB, we need a good spread of topic expertise, clinical, practitioner, other topic expertise, sort of depending on the type of committee. the type of the research that the committee is going to review. And of course, we require methodological expertise, so that's statisticians, trialists, health economists, but also qualitative expertise and other methodologists, again, sort of depending on the type of research that the committee will see. And as I mentioned before, important to include public members on the committee to help think about how patients and the public are going to be involved in the research, but also really helpful for other aspects. It can be very helpful when you think about the setup of research, you know, how the research is going to be undertaken, and how patients and the public are going to be involved in the actual research, and how they're going to be recruited, etc. So the committee will also have a chair, and Jane Noyes, who chairs the two integrated funding scheme boards, will be presenting after me. So she'll be able to provide her perspective of her experience of doing that. Of course, conflict of interest is a major consideration. So it's really important to have a spread of different institutions represented on the committee. And also we do consider the diversity of committee members to allow for different perspectives there. Recruiting to boards and committees tend to be via open adverts to invite new members to put themselves forward, but also approaching specific people with a specific topic expertise when that is required. It is a bit of an art to put committees together. Okay, so thinking about a conflict of interest then, so it's really important to have this robust conflict of interest policy to avoid bias in the assessment process. So this is the integrated funding scheme's conflict of interest policy. So conflicted members are always removed from the room during discussion of that particular application. So conflicts are when people who are members of the board or the panel are directly involved with the work. Of course, if you're an applicant or something, you can't be in the assessment of it. But also if they have personal relationships with applicants, if they work in the same school, division or departments, so kind of more the immediate business area here as applicants. And for chairs, you know, this extends to the same institution. So we try to avoid that, or we do avoid that. If the committee member has collaborated with the applicants, and there's some examples there, or if they may benefit financially from the work. So if they are, they will not be part of the assessment of that specific application. Okay, next slide, please. So we have assembled the committee, we have a conflict of interest policy, and now we need to set the criteria on which to base our assessment. And this, of course, links back to the aims of the funding scheme. So at stage 1 in the integrated funding scheme, the focus of that stage 1 assessment is really on the need for and the importance of the research question in relation to policy, to practice, and to public need. So the committee or the panel will be asking, is there a clear description of the health and care need that the proposal is addressing? Has the research been placed in the appropriate policy or practice context? And is it going to have the potential to influence those? Have the applicants justified the importance of that need in terms of the scale of the problem or the likely impact on those with the health or care need? Demonstrated a gap in the research evidence that the proposal is going to add to, and have they demonstrated that the methods proposed are suitable for answering the research question? So these are the areas that the assessing committee will be asked to look at stage 1. So what about stage 2? If we go to the next slide. So at this stage, much more about the scientific quality and the methodological rigor. So the funding board here is asked to consider whether the methodology and the science are sound. There is a clear demonstration of that a team that has been assembled has the necessary skills experience, project management, and infrastructure support, so that the project can be successfully completed. That the estimated recruitment rates are well explained and well justified, and that any sort of ethical, legal, social implications of the research have been considered, and that there's evidence of public and practitioner involvement in the design and the delivery, ideally, of the project as well there. And that the cost of the research represents good value for money. And that's especially important given the jet there. Okay, so what actually happens in the funding committee meeting then? So this slide just sets out the assessment process at stage 2, but it's very similar to the actual process at stage 1. A brief introduction by the chair, after which the designated board members, so those board members who've been asked to lead a discussion of a specific application, they present their views and the strengths and weaknesses of the application. They summarize any sort of the external reviewers' views, if we have those. And one of these designated board members tend to be the public member on the board. And then discussion is opened up to everyone on the committee, to involve everyone. And after that, the chair will summarize the committee's views, and where the committee's views sort of diverged, attempts to kind of come together on these. The designated board members are then asked to provide indicative scores, and the board is then invited, everyone's invited to provide their score for the application when that's done anonymously. So the mean score is then used to guide the recommendations for what the funding committee will make. So I suppose it's just to note that a funding committee doesn't make funding decisions. It makes a recommendation to the funder, and the funder ultimately makes a decision about whether to fund something. Next slide, please. So these are the scoring criteria that the stage 2 assessment uses, but it's very similar to the stage 1 assessment. We use a 6-point scoring scale. In RFPB, we used to have a 10-point scoring scale, but until recently, but we've also adopted a 6-point scoring scale now, and it's the same across the NIHR actually. So again, just to note that scores are used as one tool to help the committee to come to a decision, but it's not purely based on the B scores. So for example, a funder might also consider overlaps with existing research if it turns out that the same project has been funded previously. That might also feed into it. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, in terms of the number of applications, so here's what we received at the first call of the integrated funding scheme and the success rates. So we had 35 applications the first round, so it's quite a lot of applications really. So on average, between the two arms, 57% of applications were invited to submit a stage 2 application, and in the end, we funded 7 projects. Actually, 2 of those had been invited directly to submit a stage 2 application from previous round. Okay, yes. Now, yeah, call 2 we received around 30, but board meetings for those are coming up. And what about this sort of final aspect then, feedback to applicants? So very important aspect, especially when the scheme wants to help develop early career researchers, and something that applicants do sometimes take issue with. So in terms of producing feedback, during each discussion at our meetings, we as the Secretariat take notes or then summarize the feedback on each application, which is then shared with the committee members and the chair for review and for approval, and is then shared with applicants as part of their outcome letter. Next slide, please. So if an applicant has been rejected, we need to set out the reasons why, and those that have been recommended for funding or invited to resubmit, or invited to submit a stage 2 application if it's a stage 1 assessment. The feedback will then detail any required changes, make suggestions for improvement, and the applicants will then be required to respond to those suggestions and requests. Next slide, please. Okay, I have a number of slides here that are about helping improve an application. So kind of some common themes that have been identified through the assessment process. So I don't know if we can share the slides later, but it might be worth, if you're interested, just having a look through these. I think we can probably, in the interest of time, quickly just go to slide 23, where I just briefly wanted to mention meta-science. So kind of mentioned a few of our kind of research and research activities. I just thought I'd put this up here because we as funders, we want to use evidence-based practice. We expect it from you, and this is important to us too. So the UKRI and the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology have set up a meta-science unit, and this is going to design and run experiments to test the effectiveness of our funding processes to help guide future developments in this area. So this is an exciting initiative from our perspective, and we are involved in this as well. So it's an interesting thing. Okay, next slide, please. So if you need any further information about the scheme, the integrated funding scheme, you can find that here. And on the next slide is my email. If we move to the next slide. So thank you so much for listening. And if we have time for questions or if we need to move on, I'm happy either way. But you feel free to reach out to me on this email. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Michael. And I'm sorry if there's a bit of a hum in the background, but I'm in a little cubby hole with an electrical riser in the cupboard. Does the sound okay?
Yes, that's fine at my end.
Brilliant. Okay, I can see some thumbs up there, so that's brilliant. So I've been asked to talk about the role of the funding panel chair, and I think it's very timely as I'm chairing a funding panel today in London. So it's a nice opportunity to step out for 5 minutes and talk to you. And I'm sure that you've had some good preparation into this sort of more operational side of things from Michael already. So I'm keen to build on what he's already said. Next slide, please. So I've got a lot of funding panel and board experience under my belt. So just to show you the sort of credentials here, I've been both a chair and deputy chair of a vast array of panels across the UKRI and Health and Care Research Wales, both for primary research and for studentships and fellowships. I think the key message here is that there's all the processes are sort of, they do have a lot of similarities with very few differences. So the vast majority of the systems of integrity, etc., and the role of the chair is exactly the same. So you can be reassured that there is a lot of consistency with very minor deviations across all of the panels. Next slide, please. So as you know, funding panels are convened to fund research, not prevent the fund of research. But in the case of Health and Care Research Wales, we make recommendations and rank applications to the funder, and then Health and Care Research Wales makes the ultimate decisions, which I find very useful. You will all be aware that the panels process far more applications than there is available funding, so they have to make difficult decisions or recommendations. And generally, in my experience over the last 10 years, is that the overall quality of applications has gone up. So therefore, sort of, what we fund now and what would be deemed fundable, the benchmark is much higher in terms of quality in order to get funded. So there are robust processes which you've been hearing about to meet the usual due diligence requirements for spending of government money, which is taxpayers' money, and that's right and appropriate. And so what I want to actually just sort of share with you are some of the integrity processes that we use. Next slide, please. So the role of a funding panel chair is around both being independent and upholding integrity. It's a formal appointment, and the main purpose is to ensure robust processes, fair and high quality decisions and recommendations that prioritise the best applications for funding. As context to this, the chair needs to be independent, but also to have a knowledge and understanding of the funder and what they see as priorities and how they need to meet their objectives. So over the years, I've actually got to know Health and Care Research Wales very well. I also feel that I've got a really good knowledge of the policy arena and the policy criteria, the policy priorities for Wales, the legal framework within which we operate. And all of that information is really important because it does feed into how you manage a panel. And it also gives you an idea in the panel of when to ask the funder representative if you're unsure, because the funder representative is always there to help clarify. Next slide, please. It also helps to maintain integrity if the chair has knowledge of the panel members. All the panel members are at various stages of their careers with various levels of panel experience. In Wales, we like to bring earlier mid-career researchers onto the panel in mentored positions. And again, it's the chair's role to make sure that they're supported in that role and that, that they are actually making or following due diligence with their decision making. But if something does seem a little bit off, then it is the chair's role to actually to stop and to actually feed back to them and to clarify points to make sure that there is fair play. So I think that the chair needs an antennae to detect where there is potential of danger of things going off track. And that could be a loss of objectivity or unconscious biases. And one example of that might be a panel member who continues to want to score high because the question's really important. Well, all of the applications at stage 2 are there because the question's important. At stage 2, the panel is looking at the science and a number of different criteria. But if a panel member just really wants to score on the basis of importance of the question, then the chair needs to remind them that they need to actually take all the criteria into account. So that's just one example where the chair might actually have a role to make sure. So there's a sort of ability to read the room, both with the verbal and non-verbal communication. The panels can be quite large, and I find in-person panels much easier to manage than the online hybrid panels because it's much easier to read the room. The non-verbal communication that people use is quite obvious as the panel chair, so you can pick it up quite quickly. And if you need to act on it, then you can do as the chair. Next slide, please. So the chair's role is to oversee the implementation of the standard processes and procedures to ensure integrity that Mike and Jennifer have just gone through. So I think take it as read that the administrative team manages the entire process, so that's all done behind the scenes. But it is the chair's role to read all of the applications, the reviews, and if appropriate, the applicant responses prior to the meeting and to familiarise themselves with everything. So take it as read that the chair should have a reasonably good knowledge of all the applications. So there's a formal agenda, as many of you will know, with very tight timings. The chair has a more detailed copy of the agenda, which is really helpful. So a lot of you who've been on panels might think that the chair has some sort of magical powers going on, but they don't. They're just better prepared. And that's because of the secretariat that helps them to run the agenda. So I'm always very grateful for that. So the chair's role is to make sure that the panel processes run smoothly on the day and according to the agreed transparent processes. And the chairing style needs to get the best from the panel on the day. So that means working authoritatively. You need to have some authority in the room as the chair. It needs to be working respectfully of everybody's opinions and making sure that everybody's included. So it needs to be collaboratively. But you also need to be effective. You can't stall on the agenda, and you need to give equal weight to all of the applications. So I think that's one of the worst nightmares of a chair, is to lose control of the agenda. So I'm always very tight on timings to make sure that we get to the end. One of the most important things is to make sure that there are still sufficient people, in fact, everybody in the room at the end of the day when ranking happens. Because there are sort of two stages. We go through every application, we score them, but at the end we rank them because some applications might have similar scores, so you'd want to rank them in priority. We need everybody there at the end of the day to rank them. So that's why the chair has such a really important role in terms of integrity, of making sure that that agenda is to time. Another really important role is the reclarification of conflicts of interest of panel members. So panel members need to declare them beforehand. They obviously don't address any applications for which they're conflicted. There is a higher threshold of conflict of interest for the chair, which I always think is very important. And there is another opportunity at the introduction of every application for people to actually highlight a new conflict of interest, or anything that the panel member feels that might conflict them in any way, even if they don't need to leave the room. We do like to record it. I have a real radar for unconscious bias. I think also, you know, you have to sort of pick that up if you think that a panel member is using some of their own information that's not in the application, that they're using their own intelligence to judge an application. You can pick that up because you're aware of what's in the application. And I think it's always important to remind the panel members regarding confidentiality. We don't want anything from the panel slipping out into the public domain until the minutes are published. But it used to be the case years ago that members on the panel somehow the intelligence got out and people tended to know what had been funded, but that we've all stopped now. For integrity and transparency, the work of the panel stays in that room until the minutes are published. Another important integrity criteria is that the assessment criteria are standardized and everybody should broadly apply them in the same way. So if areas are missing or criteria are missed, one of the chair's roles is to make sure that all the aspects are covered. So next slide, please. So one of the sort of, I think, most challenging thing for a chair is that you need to multitask. You need to listen to the discussion whilst at the same time making notes on each application and the key points. And the chair has an important role in summarising the discussion and feeding back that summary before the final scores are made. So that's a key integrity point. I think that the chair has a real role in clarifying what's the strength of the application and what's the potential limitation. And I think in my experience, panel members tend to gloss over the strengths and focus more on the limitations. So sometimes the panels feel a bit like doom and gloom because all the panel members, all they do is actually highlight what's wrong with the application rather than what's right. So the chair's role is to make sure that that presentation is balanced and the strengths are balanced against the potential limitations. The other role for the chair is to help the panel tease out and delineate what's potentially fixable rather than a fatal flaw. Sometimes it's very hard from the discussion that ensues to decide, well, is that really fatal or is it just fixable? How important is that bit of feedback? I think it's incredibly important to make sure that the patient and public members' assessments are included and that they're included meaningfully. And I think that's done very well in the Health and Care Research Wales arena. I think that that's managed very well. I think the other thing is to ensure that the peer reviewer feedback is adequately considered, but it is used as a guide. Just because there are sort of a range of peer review scores doesn't mean to say that you have to follow the lead of any one peer reviewer. As a panel, we use it as a guide. So it's a helpful compass, to help us, but it's not the definitive influence on how we score an application. So we need to clarify the adequacy of applicant responses as well, because often in the panels there is an opportunity for the applicants to respond to any feedback. So we have to check that out as well. Have they adequately responded to it? And then the chair has a really clear role in ensuring the subsequent feedback to the applicants is constructive and, if appropriate, can inform further development of the application. Now that's in the context that the feedback's normally bulleted and it's quite brief, but nonetheless those briefing points need to be very constructive and concise and helpful. I always take the view that feedback should be helpful and help the applicants build a better application for next time. So it's part of a developmental process. Next slide, please. So the hardest parts for the role, for me at least, are having to rank the applications at the end. You often get a group of applications with similar scores, and we're asked to try and prioritise them. I find that really hard because the applications that come into Health and Care Research Wales are often very different. So ranking them, I find the hardest part. So we just try our best with that. And sometimes, we just have to leave it to the decisions of the funder, because they have more information. I think the funder has better knowledge of the spread of applications that they've already funded in their portfolio and what might be the contribution. So sometimes afterwards, the funder comes back to the chair just to actually sort of, talk about the decisions that they've made in the context that what's already funded on the portfolio, because they want a balanced portfolio. I think the other hardest thing is that not knowing all applications that are assessed are fundable and go on to be funded, because the funding envelope is never sufficient. But what I would say about Health and Care Research Wales is, as a funder, they try their hardest that if the committee, the panel makes recommendations for funding, they do try their hardest to see if there is any funding left over from other calls or whatever. If there's a very high quality application, then they would try their best to fund it. But, sometimes, there isn't enough money. So applicants can be encouraged to reapply. But I think, of all the funders I work for, that Health and Care Research Wales is the most flexible in this regard, which is really nice. So the best parts for me are, it's a very worthwhile and satisfying role. It's absolutely exhausting. You can probably tell today, this is my second day of chairing, so I'm just a bit sort of like, I need to be in a darkened room now. And you go home absolutely exhausted, but it is very satisfying. The funder and the administrative support's absolutely amazing. My view is it's a very rigorous and independent process based on external peer review with a thorough panel assessment, and part of my role is to make sure that it's thorough. I'm very grateful that the panel only needs to make recommendations and we don't make the final decisions. And I do see that it's absolutely an honour and privilege to serve as a panel chair, because it's such a worthwhile thing to do. So I think that's my last slide. I don't think there's another one. And I'll hand back to Michael.
Brilliant, thanks, Jane. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's kick off with the last 35 minutes. I'm really pleased to introduce Marc Boggett. Marc is one of the unsung heroes of health and care R&D in Wales. Anyone here who's got a grant award from Health and Care Research Wales will have received their formal grant award from Marc's team, who are absolutely diligent in tracking subsequent payments and making sure that we look after you post award. So welcome, Marc, and really looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Michael. So this presentation is how your grants are managed, why we do what we do. It's a post award perspective, so it builds on what Jane has just discussed, the actual funding board itself, and what Jennie has discussed, i.e. the call, the assessment process. So the content of the slides, there aren't too many. I've tried to keep it brief. So context and principles of grant management, introduce the RDD team and our partners. The basic tenets of how we actually ensure scientific excellence and obtain value for money. And then briefly discuss how we actually achieve this. So it's around contracting, active monitoring of our grants, variation to contract processes, and finally just collecting outcome data via ResearchFish. So this is the grants team. It's quite a small team, you'll see. We're obviously, like Michael stated, and we're part of Michael's team. So I have a team of Sandra and Larry. If you're grant holders, you're likely to be in contact with them in terms of receiving financial letters regarding financial matters, so a grant award letter or a variation contract, things like that. And then we've got partners that the Health and Care Research Wales grant management team. So on the project award side, there's Jennie's team, LGC, which we contracted with a year or two ago, a couple of years ago now, to deliver project-based integrated funding scheme award management. And obviously our colleagues at the faculty as well, who obviously manage the personal grant awards. So just a very small team in RDD, but the actual number of active grant awards is actually quite high. We've counted it up today. It's 149 or so awards with a total lifetime value of around 25 million. Around a quarter of these are sort of project-based awards, which Jennie referred to, integrated funding scheme and its predecessors. But the majority now are personal development awards since the establishment of faculty and the great work they do. The number of awards that we have currently active or have completed in the last 5 years on ResearchFish platform, meanwhile, there's about 170. So that shows slightly different variation, but there's quite a lot of projects that are monitored at the moment. So just focus on the principles. I mean, Michael's covered these already, really, but on the grant management side, the sort of nuts and bolts of it, we need to make sure that public money is used in a way that's that the grant is actually delivered in a way that's consistent with the application that's approved by Jane and the funding board. That the project is in line with the relevant grant scheme guidance, the remit, eligibility rules that are set out at the beginning of the call. That the grant is delivered in line with the terms and conditions of the signed grant award letter. And that's things like start and end date, budget, any legal requirements. And like Michael mentioned as well, is able to satisfy any potential audit or external scrutiny. One of the key things with grant management is that it's the work we undertake it's sort of informed by our need to demonstrate that public money is being used for the benefit of people in Wales and is being used correctly in a sort of a fair and transparent manner. And that is also, to satisfy ministers, auditors, our health and social services finance team, and also the public generally. So briefly go over how we actually do this. So like Michael said, we've worked on grant monitoring for over a decade now, and we've developed and refined various grant monitoring processes, and they're based on recognised good practice and underpinned by Welsh Government templates and guidance. We have a Welsh Government Grants Centre of Excellence team within Welsh Government. We've got a legal team as well, who advise us around any legal issues and produce grant offer letters, various contract letters as well. And it's also based on just our experience generally. Our partnership with Jennie and LGC has also informed what we do. I mean, we get to learn how NIHR actually grant manage their schemes as well. And we're also in a UK-wide bureaucracy review, reform and implementation network, which is a UK-wide group. And also, like Michael mentioned, Evia as well. So that keeps us aware of later developments, both nationally and globally as well. And we welcome any sort of feedback on our processes. They're always continually under review, and we're always looking to improve and develop any process or template. So this image is a contract. So this is the contracting section. So I'm assuming that people on this call have no knowledge, but obviously a lot of you will. But basically, if you get an award, so once the award has been signed off by the funding board, the details of that award come from either faculty or LGC. And then we draft, or we use the basic Welsh Government template to draft a grant award letter. The grant award letter sets out start and end dates, the purposes of the award, which are based on usually on the summary of the project being delivered. It provides the terms and conditions and also the reporting requirements as well. And this letter is signed by Welsh Government and by the award lead and 2 host institution colleagues. The award letter also includes a payment and reporting profile. So any awardee needs to, pay attention of this, as do any finance colleagues in the institution. It's usually a schedule of equal quarterly payments and paid in arrears. That's in line with general Welsh Government processes. And it's equal payments rather than any other alternative, because it's in line with basically our departmental and Welsh Government planning requirements. So we need to have to plan budgets on a financial year basis, and having equal payments helps us plan it in the most simple way possible and adjust when needs be. It's clipboard, it's active monitoring. So all new awardees, they receive all the guidance templates along with the grants award letter. Generally, awardees, they send their progress reports to either LGC or to the faculty. And the progress report is quite a brief 2-page template. Awardees are sent reminders as well for the reports as well. And this is key. The key to the progress reports as well is for awardees to flag up any problems they may have encountered as well. And that helps for future, if there is any variations to contract, anything like that, is that it's not a surprise or things like that. So, and these project progress reports are usually quarterly as well. So as I mentioned, LGC and faculty review these reports, and they inform us whether they are satisfied with the reports and whether my team in RDD, so that would be Sandra or Eleri, can actually release the actual payments, and the payments are usually quarterly. The other reports that we ask for is an end of project report that Michael's mentioned. It's in the 1/3/25 format. We also ask for an end of project financial reconciliation statement as well, and that's signed off by the host and checked by RDD as well. We also publish the 1-page end of project report, and that goes on our website. The 3-page end of project report, that goes to policy makers and practitioners, while the 25-page scientific report, that's usually held back until the project agrees it can be published, because they need to go to journals, etc. But we aim to publish that within sort of a year of the end of the project. So that's a roller coaster there, and that sort of signifies the ups and downs of a project. So when a project needs to make a change to their original sort of delivery of their project, it's called a variation contract. There's a formal process for this. And just as background, since October 2023, we reviewed how many variation requests we've received, and we've worked out it's around 100 since October 2023. That's about 7 a month, I believe. We try to be flexible and supportive of any sort of variation requests. We understand that there's going to be problems that counter during projects, whether it be gaining approvals for ethical approval, or recruitment rates might have varied, things like that. Saying that, our flexibility is somewhat limited by the financial framework in which we work, and I think Michael's mentioned that it's the civil service budget frameworks that we have to work within. So when dealing with a variation, happy to receive them. We take a balanced approach, but it's based on the expectation that the project should ideally be delivered on time and within budget, and we treat requests for variations fairly and on a case-by-case basis. In the variation contract templates, we ask awardees to let us know the proposed changes and its justification, how that fits with the original application and the scheme remit, details of any requested time extension, any revised Gantt charts or milestones, and also this is quite a new part of VTC template. Is we ask what could be delivered without the VTC request being agreed. So, like Michael's mentioned previously as well, we have to think about budgets, and we need to stay within our budget and meet various commitments, cover current expenditure, and also our plans for future awards. Because, like Michael said, budgets are quite tight and always at risk. One impact of variations is that, to bear in mind, is that if there's an extension to a new financial year or there's a budget increase on one award, it can have a knock-on effect on reducing money available for future calls or future awards. So we have to sort of balance that quite carefully. And that can also generate underspends or overspends, and that's something we are often asked to explain to our departmental finance colleagues. So it's all a tricky balancing act, really, when dealing with variations or change generally. See a few points here. So, as I say, we try and balance the books each year. We ask for interim reconciliation statements to support variations, and that helps inform our decision making. And reconciliation statements, I should add, they outline, you know, by budget lines what has been spent by the project and what's remaining, or etc. If there are scientific or protocol changes in the variation, we tend to share that with the funding board chair. In many cases, it could be Jane Noyes, because they're the ones with the scientific expertise, and they review the original application, etc., etc. They inform our decision. And in some cases, we actually ask the awardee to meet with RDD and with the chairs to discuss any significant changes or issues in a variation, but that's quite rare. A few more points to note. I would say the one interesting development for new awardees, that we no longer accept VTCs that receive less than 12 weeks before the agreed end date. So that's something we're reviewing, but that's because quite often we receive variations that's right near when they're about to finish, and it's quite difficult to agree them when it's you know, they're just about to end and they want to extend another 6 months or 12 months and things like that, and haven't made us aware in project reports as well. So that's very rare, but at the moment, any new awards, they need to give us notice of at least 12 weeks before the end date to submit a variation. In extreme cases, a project could be closed. It's very rare, but that is an option in the grant award letter as well. So the final section is just on research fish. As part of the grant award letter, awardees who deliver a project, so it's not all personal awardees, it's only those personal awardees with a project, and that's studentships or fellows as well. They submit data and outputs, outcomes and impacts via ResearchFish, and that goes alongside their standard quarterly reports. I make sure that all relevant awardees are invited. So if you have an award, you should, and you're eligible to use ResearchFish, you should get an invitation. Awardees submit data annually and for 5 years beyond the end of the award. We do remind awardees as well, so it shouldn't come as a shock, and you know, you get plenty of time to prepare for it. In very rare cases, non-submission could result in payments being withheld, but it's very rare. But we always check at the end of project period. So before the final payment is released, we generally only release that if ResearchFish has been used by the project. And we use ResearchFish because the data, you know, basically helps what I was talking about before. It demonstrates value for money, the value of the investment, the benefits and the impacts and the outputs of our research. And we have guidance available on our website and via ResearchFish platform as well. So just in case you're not aware, these are the common outcome questions on ResearchFish. There's around 16 common questions, which is across UK funders. So we use it, as do NIHR, many other funders across the UK. So it covers things like publications, engagements, influence on policy, and also public involvement as well. This is the final slide. So for ResearchFish, we review the compliance rates after each submission window, it's called. So there's a window of about a month or so each year where people researchers can submit their data. The compliance rate this submission period just gone in February, March was 92%, and that's a vast improvement over the years. Hopefully this next year coming up, the next window is March, April again. hopefully that'll be similar rates. We also, so with the data, what do you do with the data? What's the point of it? Well, we undertake an in-house analysis of the qualitative data, and we share that with our comms team and just the team generally. Our colleagues in comms, they can contact projects and produce things like a press release or media package or website news item, or in some cases approach a project to be a conference speaker in the future, or to have some sort of webinar or things like that. So it's really useful, the research data. And the researchers team themselves as well, they also provide a quantitative analysis of the data submitted as well. And what we intend to do is publish data from the most recent submission period in the next few months as well. And hopefully going to do that every year as well. So I think that's everything then. So yeah, thanks for listening. I hope that didn't go too long. I tried to keep that short, but that's everything. Thanks.